Good morning, everyone. Call together the Affordable Housing Trust Fund meeting for Tuesday, May 21st at 10 a.m. In attendance, we have Rima Sherry, Charity Grace, Brooke Moore, and Brian Sullivan. I will look for an action on number 2, an approval of the agenda.
I'd like to, no, let's just leave it as is.
You want to move anything around?
Yep,
Or?
you're here. It's good.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Item number 3, look for a motion on the approval of the minutes from March 19th, March 27th, and April 23rd.
Move to accept?
All in favor?
Second.
Second.
Great.
Second.
We have item number 4, we have an application, closing cost assistance for 3 Waite Drive. Is there anyone here to speak on this item?
Move to,
Do we know if we're expecting them, or was there any comment if,
She was gonna try, she works a breakfast shift, so she was gonna try her hardest to be here this morning, but she did say it might not be possible.
okay, so it sounds like we're probably not expecting them. Okay. So we'll take a minute, review the application, see if anybody has any questions.
It is a Habitat home, just as you're reviewing through, so there wouldn't be an offer to purchase, a purchase and sale, all of those things that would be through just a regular covenant restricted home, just as an FYI.
We do have some Habitat members. Does anybody want to address or speak to?
you actually have to, sorry, come up to the microphone, so, because we're being recorded.
Sorry, Joe, you gotta go to that one. This doesn't work.
So Sunita and Sunil and Geeta, we're almost complete with their home. We're about 97% complete on 3 Waite Drive. We picked them to be the homeowners about 3 years ago. We picked a number of people. They've been extremely helpful. They've been working in the community. We just asked them to apply for the assistance program, and they're certainly deserving of it. They're at the probably 45% to 50% bracket, and this home is going to change their life.
Awesome.
So
Awesome. They've been able to help and participate under your program
he's done
and
over 400
hands-on.
He's done over 400 hours of work and still working.
That's
on the
awesome.
project.
Awesome.
And Habitat has been working diligently to try to get this unit included on the SHI list.
Yes, that's been going, so we've had the applicant conversations with the DHCD. We've been going back and forth since last August. It's been trials and tribulations with them. You met them again last week. The problem was when we picked these homeowners, we didn't. The process is very similar, and it's very similar to Ann's process. But they advertise a little more broadly than we do. We advertise on the island, and we also have the restriction of you have to put in 350 hours of work. So it's been a snag with them. We hope to hear in the next 2 weeks. If we hear in the next 2 weeks, the select board has been helpful in saying that if we get this house on, there are possibly other lots for us on Waite Drive, because right now we're out of land. And we have funding, but we just don't have land to try to build that home. So we're looking for any avenue we possibly can to get this done.
Great.
Okay.
Do any board members have any more questions while he's here? Or anything on the application? Hearing none, is there a motion?
A motion to approve.
And
Second.
the second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Just for the record, I'll note that Judith has joined the meeting. Item number 5, Shy List Management. Tucker, I'll come to you on that.
Sure, thank you. So this document is really meant to be the starting point of, call it a tracking mechanism for the different efforts that are underway to assist the town in reaching the 10% target and perhaps above at some point. And I think there's probably universal agreement that in trying to address the needs of the town, everyone would prefer that we do it according to how we as a town would like to do it versus the alternative of an unfriendly 40B situation. So remaining in safe harbor while we're on our way to the 10% is, I think, an important aspect to a lot of folks within the community. So this is really meant to illustrate how we might think about doing that. And fortunately, about 10 days ago now, through a lot of work, a lot of effort on behalf of Richmond, the town council, DHED approved the local action unit applications for all 3 Richmond components, Meadows 2, Sandpiper 1, and 2. So that really paves the way for their project to provide 2 years of safe harbor. The remaining elements for that to happen are Richmond needs to pull building permits for at least 48 of the rental units within Meadows 2. They already have pulled, I believe, at least 16 of those 48 units, and it's anticipated they'd be pulling the additional permits within the next month or two. And once we have achieved that 48 unit level, we would be going to the state to have our housing production plan certified, and that effectively means we would be in a period of 2 years of safe harbor.
I just have a question.
Yeah, please.
Clarification question. While their total number of units will exceed 48, we only have the ability to count for 48 of the units through their entire process of their project. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the Richmond development, just for the public record, as people are referencing this, we'll have 2 years of safe harbor, even though the total's greater, and we'll be looking to the next project
Right.
for units after those 48.
Sort of the maximum that any given, and Laura Schufeld is here and can maybe clarify anything that I'm saying incorrectly, but the maximum safe harbor period that any one project can essentially contribute to a town is the 2 years. So if you're doing it, in our case, because of our target number is 490 as set by the state, our 10% number. Because we have an approved housing production plan, our number in order to create a year of safe harbor is 24 units of, per in any given year. So the maximum that you can accumulate is the 2 years. So even if we did a project with 72 units or 96 units, we only would be getting the 2 years of the safe harbor. It all goes back to the date at which the project was initially eligible to count toward your SHI list.
And continuing on kind of on the public education, this document is included in the packet, which is online,
Yes.
available if somebody wants to reference that, and will be updated as we see projects move through.
And this is, and again, this is going to be a little bit of a moving target,
Right.
and you'll see below, like, you know, what are the projects coming up that could keep us in a safe harbor period, and how we might be thinking about when to implement them. Below that, there is the estimated SHI count on our way to 490, and what would be contributing to those SHI numbers below that total. Again, this is sort of a best guess type of look at things, but reasonable, in my opinion, based on what we know today. So a couple things to point out would be, you know, sometimes you may hear folks say, well, golly, like, I look at all the building that's going on around the island and we're never going to get to the 10%. And what is important to point out there is that it's only the year-round houses that, or year-round residences that count toward that 10% requirement. That number gets reset every 10 years. The decennial census is occurring in 2020, as we all know. We were just at DHCD last week, and they estimated that it would probably be 2022 before we had a new 10% target, and then that would be in place for the following 10 years. So as the totals illustrate, if the things that are in the pipeline, so to speak, were to happen, that would carry us above our current 10% target of 490. One thing to point out came up as a question last night when the NP and EDC reviewed this chart, is if you look at Surfside Crossing, you'll see 23 units being added in this year, and then those 23 units coming off the following year. And what that is meant to represent is, again, just sort of based on what we know today, as we all know, the ZBA is doing yeoman's work reviewing that project. It's presently proposed at the 92-unit level. If a comprehensive permit were to be issued with a whole bunch of conditions, but if a comprehensive permit is issued, the town does immediately get credit for the affordable units under that permit. So the ZBA is reviewing a 92-unit plan that, they may end up approving something significantly different or not approving anything at all. But this is meant to illustrate that if it were to be approved with conditions as proposed presently, it would add 23 units. The minus 23 is presuming that under the scenario where a permit is issued, someone is not going to be happy. It could be the developer, it could be other parties, and that decision will get appealed. And if the building permits aren't pulled within that first year, which they wouldn't be under an appeal, those units would come off.
With the potential of, in the future, going back on once the building permits were, if the unhappy person became happy.
And that's correct. And actually, if you look a little further along the line, this sort of presupposes that a couple years later, the legal aspect would be resolved and it would start to produce something. I just had put in 5 units
As a
year
placeholder,
as
right.
a placeholder.
So these are on best guesstimates, kind
Yeah.
of observing the political environment, but in no way, shape, or form are accurate statements of what is happening.
Beautifully said.
Okay, excellent. Any more detail on here do you want to cover?
Just at the bottom for the trust's benefit is just some estimation of what monies might be required toward the implementation of the different projects noted at the top, which would be contributing to the SHI list. And of course, there are going to be others that the trust, I think, will be talking about in the coming months, but this is just a first kind of placeholder for where different monies may be required.
Great.
So, question.
Yep.
Based on these numbers here, in the event that the 23 units did come off,
Yep.
we'd still be in safe harbor. Or not?
Yes. Yes, good question. So at the top, the colored chart, the orange is indicating the project that is providing the period of safe harbor. The green, and that's where Surfside Crossing would come in, is indicating it otherwise would provide safe harbor if we weren't in safe harbor.
Right.
But it's not the project on which we're relying, if you
Okay.
will.
Good deal.
Great. Judith, is there any commentary from the meeting, NEPDC, that you want to provide? NPED, forgive me.
EDC, it took me a long time to get there.
Thank you.
Tucker did a great job. I think people really listened and appreciated hearing, I think, some of the same questions about Surfside Crossing that Tucker just went over came up. There wasn't a whole lot of discussion in response. I asked a question just to get Tucker to have a chance to say a little bit more, but that group, just so you know, in case any of this may be helpful, we also talked about later in the meeting, and I think Tucker stayed through all the meeting, about our own planning processes in terms of goal setting and working with Andrew Vorse, the planning director, to do goal setting. We had spent a lot of time on transportation issues, and that was probably the lion's share of time, but I think equally important was the sense that we're going to try to be focusing more on big picture areas that we would work on systematically through the year. So I hope, in effect, that would be a good opening to come back again. Tucker said a couple of times that there'd be somebody selected from that commission to be part of the added advisory group working on these topics. Bert Johnson, who is, I think, the Nantucket Housing Authority rep on that body, asked some questions about that as well. And I think overall receptiveness, but nothing surprising.
Great. Okay. Any more questions or comments? Hearing none. Thank you, Tucker. Let's move to item number 6, Neighborhood First Implementation Plan.
Okay.
Brooke, can I throw this to you to
Yep.
kind of lead us, and then?
Once I find the page here. That's budget. Okay, so it's the page that looks like this. So what we wanted to do today is a small subgroup of us has been meeting to come up with a plan to implement the program, to start the process of implementing the program. And so we've come up with the following proposal for this board to consider. The formation of a work group that would begin work, and we can look at the timeline in a minute. But the composition of the work group would be a representative from town administration, 2 representatives from this board, a representative from the finance committee, from NP and EDC, from the select board, the land bank, 2 at-large members of the year-round community, and a member from the seasonal community who has expertise in housing in particular. We have a number of people that fit that bill who are seasonal members of the community. And then we would get staff support from Tucker, Ken, and Brian Turbot from town administration in terms of information and particularly related to financing and acquisition. We're looking at a timeline that we would be voting to form the work group today as described here. And then in the next few weeks, we would be doing the required advertising and recruitment for the at-large community volunteers through an Inky Mirror ad, social media, and any other mailing list to get it out broadly and get some great applicants for those seats. And then the town boards and committees would be going through the process of identifying who from their groups would be serving on this work group. Then, so throughout June and prior to our June meeting, we'd be vetting those applications, and a board, a slate of people on the work group would be presented to us at our June 18th meeting. And then we propose to have a joint meeting, an additional meeting for this body the following week to launch the work group together. And then the work group would continue to work on a monthly or more frequently as they determine basis, providing documentation for our meetings for review on a monthly basis. And then we would be proposing that they present final recommendations to us at our February meeting. And the underlying principle of this work group is to craft a program for the expenditure of $20 million, which is a substantial amount of money that we've been entrusted with by the voters, in the most transparent and thoughtful, well thought out process. And so it's incumbent on us to take the time to consider all of the intended and unintended consequences of spending that kind of money to create SHI-listed housing units. So we propose as the process or the sort of the tasks that the work group would be given would be, one, to define the program's intent, goals, and priorities. So there's a fairly broad wording within the warrant article that was passed in terms of how the money can be used. So some refining of what the intent of the warrant sponsors and was to begin with, and then the analysis of the different potential uses of the money and how they fit into a set of goals and priorities would be sort of the first. And there's some detail here, which I won't run through in detail. Then the next important work of the group would be to set criteria for the evaluation of properties that are offered to us under this program. So how do we analyze one property against another, and how does that fit into the established priorities and goals of the program? And there's a list of, it's including but not limited to location, age and condition, cost per unit, the concern about displacement of year-round tenants or owners in a property in the service of getting SHI-listed units, how all that works, estimate of improvement costs, the lot size and zoning, the number of potential additional units, and so on and so forth. So crafting a list of these criteria and then prioritizing them and kind of coming up with a metric by which we can compare one property against the other on the assumption that we're going to get multiple offers to sell properties into the program. And then, of course, there's the procurement process or the process for acquisition. And I think it's really important that members of the community who might want to offer a property understand exactly what the process is in terms of complying with procurement law for the town acquiring properties, as well as what the timeline might be as it differs from an open market sale, what the steps are in the timeline. So people come into it with eyes wide open when they come to offer their property. And then, the final piece of the puzzle will be, once properties are acquired, we have intended for this to be managed by an independent organization or entity. So what does that management contract look like? And also what would a contract look like to add additional units on a piece of property? So those two pieces of the puzzle. So that's sort of how we see tasking out this work group, and open for comments, suggestions, thoughts.
This is a great job.
So we prepared an ad to run, which was in the packet, as well as a letter to go to the other boards where we're requesting a representative be appointed. If there are any edits or comments or suggestions.
Rima?
Yeah. Do we need to have it in color?
It's up to you all.
Okay. Well, that was me being save a dime.
Yes, well, you're right. It's in the paper.
It won't, the color won't translate in the paper this small,
This is
so it's
mock-up,
worth,
So
yeah.
it'll be black and white using this as the baseline, but it won't have blue in it.
Yeah. Won't have.
I'm not the wordsmith, but I'm wondering if there's any way to eliminate some of the copy and still have the robustness of the advertising. Just my thought, but. Having read it, I think it says everything it needs to, and
Right.
is what it is. I don't know if there's a way to extract any of it, but I just want to make sure it gets as many eyeballs as.
Well, and I think, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think with what we've got up top in bold, like that should hopefully jump out to most people.
Right,
that would
the
be
interested
and they would
party.
continue to read.
Yeah.
From there.
And I also think that Florencia can help us with social media, that it would be a smaller, draw people to this to get more information.
Right.
Without all the text. But I do think it's important to be clear what it is we're expecting of people.
Agreed.
So,
On that note, there's no commentary of the number of meetings or timeline. That might be an addition to add on when we're setting expectations of how much time we're looking for. I don't know if you can add that in, that it's a finite work group. It's only until February 2020, and it's only a 8 or 10 meetings. It's not a lifelong commitment.
Right.
I want the people who want a lifelong commitment.
Well, agreed.
Well, and it may be this committee morphs as it works.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
Right.
So it's hard to know that, but I think people will ask, right? There's a way to ask about that if they want to pursue it.
And maybe that can just be conveyed in the social media opportunities that exist and the sharing of how
Or
it is.
I'm assuming we're going to
conversation.
meet with people in person and talk to them about
Right.
it, and so we can convey more details of that
Great.
to the people who apply, to the hordes of people who apply. So I guess what we, if there aren't any further questions, I guess what we would be looking for is a motion to approve the structure of the work group, the makeup of the work group, and the goals task list as written out here, along with the proposed timeline and the newspaper ad, so that we can move forward and get everything prepped up for the June meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries unanimously.
I will email this to Mary Sharp right now. It's due at 11.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll send Mary a note,
Do you want me to?
because there's one small little edit.
Okay.
Yeah, just a typo they have in there.
You want to just
you want-
cover that with her right now? She's got it on her screen. Save you
But
the
the
effort.
only thing to change is black and white, not color, correct?
Yes, we would like to
Okay.
pay less and save the community money.
Okay.
Thank you very much to the subgroup for
That was
putting that
great-
together.
Great work.
Let's see, moving to item number 7. So this is the letter to the select board for the short-term rental tax request. And while Tucker is working with Megan, I'll just touch base on what I know. And so we made the request for a portion of the newly acquired funds from the short-term rental tax to be designated to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The way that we had written the letter, we later found out from the Finance Committee that request can't be funded through a general fund item, basically. So the letter that went out was slightly inaccurate in its request. The intent is understood that would be looking for a portion of the newly generated funds to come back to this group, while the finance department has no idea what those funds are, because the tax won't be collected or begun to be collected until July 1st. We'll be coming back to revisit this topic at future meetings in looking for a way to designate what we would be looking for, I guess, in a budget manner or item for funds to be drawn from that department. So while our letter was well-intended and I think the message was received, we may not have written it the quite right way for the finance department to work with it, and we will come back to revisit it. Does that kind of cover the, great. Does anybody have any questions on that?
I just want to mention that I think we had talked a little bit about working in conjunction, if you will, with the water quality folks. And so Annie Lowell of
From
SHAB, they voted like very similarly along the lines that you all did, and they prepared a similar letter and attended a select board recently, basically sort of endorsing both parties' approaches to this. But as Brian points out, Brian Turbot has said that the select board can't necessarily designate a percentage, but more like a fixed amount. So we'll be circling back on that.
Right, so that'll be an effort on our part to come up with a regular annualized budget line item for future town meeting. So this is going to be a target for next April's town meeting that we're going to be working towards as a group here, once we understand what those funding amounts are. Hearing no more questions, we'll move on to item number 8. We have Laura Schufelt here today to join us and help us. We're excited from Mass Housing Partnership. I'm going to throw to Tucker to lead this conversation with Laura.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Laura, that mic is the mic that works. I'm simply just going to introduce Laura. Laura has been a tremendous asset to us here on Nantucket from Mass Housing Partnership. She was integrally involved in helping with the development of the RFP and review process for the project at 6 Fairgrounds Road. She is a wealth of knowledge, and we're very glad to have her back here today.
Thank you, Tucker.
You're very welcome.
Can you hear me? Okay.
So the trust has been considering several different programs that it would like to implement, and I think really we had been we have a lot of ideas, but we hadn't had the funding in any significant way before this year, and so now we're really anxious to be rolling out a variety of different programs. And one of the ones that has been under discussion for quite a bit of time is a down payment assistance program. And in effect, it could be an extension of the successful closing cost assistance program that the trust implemented several years ago. So I know that you had thought about some models we might want to look at and how we might go about considering this. And I think, and Brian or Brooke or any of the members, please jump in. But I think one of the things that we were considering or are considering in starting with a down payment assistance program is maybe targeting it toward the Covenant Home program here, trying to encourage ownership at that 150 or less level, and thinking in part that may be at a level where we can be providing down payment assistance affordably. I don't know if that's the way to say it.
Okay, I guess the parameters around a down payment closing costs, is this on? Closing costs or down payment assistance kind of goes back to your source of funds. Remember, if you're using CPA funds, you're restricted to assisting folks at 100% or below of median income.
Yep.
If you have other funds that you're using, I know you do have other funds, then you can go up to whatever restrictions are on that or what are on the trust, which I think the trust is at 175 or 275.
175.
Okay. So that correlates with the Covenant program. So you would be able to do that using those funds. The questions that you have to answer are, first of all, what type of funding are you going to give? You can't really give grants. You can give forgivable loans. You're a public agency, and so under Massachusetts law, you couldn't grant money, but you could give forgivable loans that either bleed off after 10 or 15 years or have to be repaid at refinance if they're taking cash out, or transfer of property. So those are kind of two different ways to do it. One, typically they're 15 years or 20 years, and they bleed off or reduce how much has to be paid back on a pro-rata basis. So at the end of the term, they don't have to pay anything back. That's one way to do it. It kind of depends on how much the dollar amount is that you're giving them, whether that makes financial sense for the trust and for for the homeowner. And then the other way to do it is just put a straight, subordinate loan on that gets paid off over the course of the 20 years, only if there's a transfer or refinance with cash out.
Laura, while I have you here, and unfortunately we have a member of the public here as well that might be able to join into this conversation, one of the concerns we've talked about is throwing off the financeability of somebody in one of these additional loans, or the positioning that the trust takes in a loan and having them still be able to qualify with a bank. Your experience in other communities, what kind of situations have you seen?
So as long as you're willing to subordinate, then it's not a problem. So two things: if you're willing to subordinate, and if you're not taking monthly payments. So you're not collecting on the loan, except for certain, except for the transfers, or cash out.
And up to what percentage have you seen in other communities and other community banks be willing to take a deal to finance it? Do they go as high as 95% or 98%, or at what level?
Yeah, I mean, you could get USDA at 100, so you're just paying the closing costs basically, and whatever, or you could, bring them down to 97% or something. Most programs, besides USDA, want the home buyer to have 1.5% of their own money. And then, they could have other funds to increase that, but they want to see some buy-in from the homeowner.
Now, one of the things that we've struggled with as a board here is getting us to the place of kind of program rules and application status. Is this something, Tucker, that, in talking with Laura and Laura, that you'll be able to help kind of us produce a program element that we could?
Yeah, definitely, and it's definitely not something that you should reinvent the wheel. There's lots of successful programs around. It's picking, I like this part of this one and this part of that one and putting it together. And, maybe adding your own elements to it.
Right.
But as far as application, loan documents, all that kind of stuff, it's not worth the legal expenses to, put those things together, get it from somebody else and just tweak it.
So Laura had provided like the Wellfleet example that I think was in the packet, just as like a thought starter on a program that I think has been successful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wellfleets has been successful. They do a pretty small amount of money considering how much things cost in Wellfleet even.
Yep.
But it's an example of a program that has been successful.
And some of the, for the rest of the board members, some of the kind of chatter and ongoing conversation is this is an opportunity for us to balance out our efforts where we're creating rental shy opportunities to create ownership at the housing that's affordable category versus affordable housing. And so how can we balance out our overall effort in creating housing opportunities and meet the breadth of need in our community? So if we can figure out a way to help promote covenant lot creation, which is one of the next items in this, how could we then help with the most critical issue, which is at the high price at the moment, and for 775. So the max value of a housing of a Nantucket Covenant home today is $775,000. So
775.
okay, so 776. So at a 10% down traditional loan, we're looking at $77,000. So this is one of those, in this conversation, as this program develops, we need to talk about, one, maybe with some help of the local bank community, we can figure out what percentage they'll allow. So with the applicant having some cash in the deal, that we're going to be able to, are we looking at 5% of the total value, or?
So just quickly, I just did the math, 1.5%, which is the number you threw out, is on that cap is $11,640. And then 776 of a total deposit of obviously $77,600. So
Right.
So it would be about a 55,000, 56,000 would make up the difference between 1.5% and 10%.
So I see a reaction from the public. Bethan, did you have a comment that you could share with us? Or?
I just think we should probably go along the lines of discussions with, conforming loan limits where we're 3% down and all the programs that the
Right.
does is conforming.
Right.
So there's going to be one conversation for that, and that's something
Could you,
else.
Beth, do you mind going to the mic for us?
I was gonna break, yeah.
Hi, Beth Ann Meehan, loan officer, Cape Cod 5, and the Board of Habitat here today. I'm also a commissioner, chairperson of the Nantucket Housing Authority. So just when you're all discussing the down payment assistance programs, I think you need two different conversations going on, and they should really be very distinct. And so the first one, I think we started off by talking about is the covenant program. So up to 150% AMI right now. Yes, those folks definitely need down payment assistance big time. So $775 max price, we're looking at a $77,000 down payment. People just don't have that. So that would be a wonderful program if you were willing to go that high on providing that much in money for a down payment assistance program. Yes, secured as a second mortgage is fine. Ideally repaid back at the sale. Ideal, because no payment additional beyond their first mortgage is very important. They usually are maxed out on that first mortgage payment with qualifying as it is. So that's all really important, that conversation. And as you guys all know, those units are not included on the SHI list because they're above the 100% AMI. We still have the need. So it's terrific that Ann's office is running the covenant program really successfully, has over 90 units right now, 84 units right now that are covenant homes. Really important to incentivize that program, to sort of make it more attractive for people to consider purchasing or creating covenant unit. The closing cost assistance program is very key in that. When people are considering open market versus covenant, they say, oh, but my closing costs will be paid for, and I don't have closing cost money, so I'll choose covenant over an open market unit. In addition to that, have a down payment assistance program really does help incentivize creating more covenant units on the island and in perpetuity, which is great. So yeah, you guys are charged with creating that as a DAP program. Separate from that is going to be your conforming loan limits. So conforming loan limit right now in Nantucket is up to $484,000 and change, I think, with Fannie Mae, and with all these programs with mass housing and the federal home loan bank programs, all conforming loan limits. So to find those unit prices, we're going to be strictly looking at either the 40Bs that are existing, like Sachem's Path, or what's coming at Richmond Great Point, or maybe Surfside Crossing. Still, down payment, very, very important. Typically 3% minimum is the down payment requirement. That typically is the minimum that the borrower has to provide themselves. So when they still don't qualify for the unit, and that does happen a lot, and that's where Habitat ends up seeing these fallout buyers, the below 80% AMI people. That's where Habitat and Jerry and I see these people coming to Habitat because they're below 60%, they're below 50% AMI. So those are the really underserved people in our community, and there's a lot of them. So those folks are going to need help even beyond their minimum 3% down payment, just to be able to get to that purchase price level. So they're going to need more help, and that's where your program could come in. And then they'll get the closing cost assistance, and then they're SHI listed, which is great because they're at the 80 or the 100. But I think just going forward, you're going to have like two different approaches. One is for the not SHI listed 150 AMIs, one for the below is my only recommendation.
In a minute, we'll talk about the lot creation opportunity. Have you been working with anyone on construction loans on covenant lots? And
Great question.
could you help us understand that process and how we could participate with it?
Definitely. I have. It's interesting. So I don't know if you all saw an RFP in the paper ran all March for the Housing Authority. Request for proposals for a lot they own in Tom Nevers. They've owned for years and never had the money to build on it. So what happened was the Housing Authority is in dire need of deferred maintenance funds for their buildings, and they're very, very hard to acquire from the federal and the state agencies that provide funding to the Housing Authority. So the idea was let's sell this surplus lot. deed restricted, of course, for permanent affordability. And they went to the selectmen and they agreed to put the 150 AMI deed restriction on the lot out in Tom Nevers. They ran the RFP in the paper, and they had people respond who were qualified to build their own home on it. So we did see people at the bank trying to get qualified for a purchase construction loan. Those folks that came in, I honestly couldn't qualify anybody under 100% AMI, because by the time you look at the lot price at 190 and what they needed to build, which is about $500,000, Huntington Homes right now is running around $250,000 for the box, which is the modular home box. You need about another $250 to pay the GC for the site clearing, the foundation, the tie-ins, everything else. So, that's a pretty big project cost right there. It's around $690, and that's why we priced a lot at $190, is because we didn't want to exceed, of course, what people were going to put into the project beyond what it's absolutely worth, which right now the max is $775. So, yeah.
Just a quick question on those numbers you throw out. Is that about 1,000 square foot house? It's about 500 a foot?
Yeah, it's a good question. About two bedroom, two bath, I would say, like 1,200, 1,300 square feet. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so again, the buyers that were coming in to get pre-qualified for this project were definitely over 100% AMI. So now they're thrown into the covenant program, which is, for the bank's purposes, minimum 10% down. That's a big down payment, on a construction project cost of $700,000. Again, $70,000. First-time home buyers really don't have that, so they're stuck.
Would the bank allow this board to help a buyer get to the 10% down?
Definitely.
In a subordinate situation?
Subordinate second mortgage position, yeah, absolutely. We've done this often at Cape Cod 5 with nonprofits on the island. So we have a community workforce housing program with Cape Cod 5 that allows municipal workers, nonprofit workers to come in and purchase a jumbo purchase price loan. So again, like, $700,000, $800,000, $900,000, 10% down, no MI. 10% is really the threshold. In these jumbo mortgages, you're going to need to hit the 10%. So you're above the conforming loan limit, where conforming loan limit, great, 3% down, fine. Jumbo loans, you're looking at 10% down, and that's the limitation for most folks. So yes, we would definitely have a DAP for those purchase construction loans. We have not done a lot of them. They're very difficult to do, but we will do them, just as a service to the community, of course, because we have to. I mean, that's what we do. So we are in the process right now with a home buyer who had gotten pre-qualified to build out in Tom Nevers, and they're working out, the final qualifications with the housing authority, make sure they're under the income cap, and then they would move forward with the purchase.
And for the loan, for a construction loan to close, the buyer would need plans and a building permit and a contract?
That's correct. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Because we have to be really careful that, we're not sending somebody into the abyss of, great, we can do a land loan, and oh no, now you want to build on it? Well, you'd only qualified for the land loan. Now you have to live in a tent. So we wouldn't do that. We qualify for the whole big picture, the whole package, which means there's a huge amount of due diligence on the part of the borrower and the buyer to go out and get plans and specifications and a budget, and a contract, even just an estimate from, say, a modular home company and a general contractor that can say, yes, we.
And HDC approval?
Not HDC approval.
No? Okay.
Not HDC approval. And you don't even need to have the building permit by the time of closing. You just need to have floor plans and elevations, so we can give them to the appraiser. And then you just need to have the builder's contracts. So modular home, usually is provided pretty quickly. And then finding a general contractor who is available to provide an estimate on what they would charge to, to finish the home out once the modular unit arrives. So yeah, those two things, so that we know what the budget is, and then we're clearly showing the buyer and the borrower, look, you really need to stick to this budget, because these are the funds coming from the bank. We're going to hold them back as you're building. But you don't want to go ahead and build that 5-bedroom when you've only got the funds for the 2-bedroom kind of thing. Yeah. So,
Great.
But yeah, we'd be thrilled to be able to say, hey, you can go to AHT for the DAP program. Right now, the nonprofits have been great with doing that. This is what really great places like. The Historical Association, the Boys and Girls Club, so many nonprofits. The hospital a while ago would provide down payment assistance funds for really valuable employees they wanted to keep here. They know 10% down goes a long way. I mean, that we're talking $60,000, $70,000 versus going out and buying your own employee housing for $1 million. That's short money to keep a key employee here on the island. So, that kind of down payment assistance can come from your employer if you're lucky. Most people aren't that lucky, so they could really use Affordable Housing Trust help with that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bethan.
Yeah, sure.
I appreciate you being put on the spot. There's a lot of info. Laura, did you have some?
No, I think Megan covered the other part of it with the size of the loans that are being looked at here. First-time home buyers aren't going to fit into most of the first-time home buyer programs because of the, just the dollar amounts.
Right.
I mean, my thinking is that the covenant program is a really easy way for us to slot in to this to start, and then maybe work to the lower end later after we test it out. Because I sort of feel like that covenant buyer, I mean, I know of a number of people that I know personally who really, really had to kind of scramble together to get the down payment. They can afford the mortgage, they just don't have the cash in the bank. And it's really a pretty low risk investment on our part if it's a subordinated loan that we recover on sale.
So on that note, we know that there's a lot of need. Ann, can I put you on the spot now? And how many potential covenant buyers do you have? You maintain a list of potentials, or how many are on that?
About 75.
So 75 people who would qualify for the program who are interested in a home, and how many properties are currently available as covenants? 4, okay. So that leads us to the second part of the conversation. We have to create some lots to figure out how to get there. So the next part of this kind of timeline is in developing a covenant lot creation opportunity and program, and how do we educate the community of the program, which has been ongoing and done well, and how do we take some of the onus and burden off of them. And the thought and theory would be helping with legal, planning board, and engineering expenses to get us to a place that we can create those secondary, Judith, it'd be the secondary lot program? Or is that the zoning code?
I think that's the right description, yep.
Yep. So the effort would be kind of a 2-phase, let's work on figuring out how to market and create some lots, and then let's figure out how we can fund some construction loans on some lots to help balance out our efforts on the shy list. Tucker, did you have? Oh, I thought you just raised your hand.
No, sorry.
So kind of open for commentary, question, thoughts.
This relates a little bit to the data platform. Are we likely to get any insight or from the RFPs that we proposed, just in terms of thinking about the targeting of both? I guess it's clear there's people who would like homes like this, but I'm just wondering, our experience in the planning board typically is people are confused about covenant lots. I can't remember, 3-4 months ago, we had an example out of Tom Nevers, and we have had kind of informal discussions that there's a lot of land in Tom Nevers that would be susceptible to more covenant lots if they were, if people knew more how this worked, but typically people don't know how this works. So I think you've got to do the marketing, that's certainly right. I would think that trying to make them whole if they're going to proceed here, which would include engineering and legal, would really be helpful. I don't know what that likely amounts to. Tucker, would you have a guess on that?
I mean, I don't have like an informed number, so.
From my experience, you're probably looking at a probably $15,000 to $20,000 figure to get your engineering plan, to have somebody represent you at the planning, and then some filing and recording fees would probably be a good guesstimate.
Would the idea be to basically be, providing this financing, if you will, for those services temporarily, and then it's repaid when the lot is sold, or at some
I would think that that's open, open for discussion to talk about. But I think that there's an easy repayment trigger, right? When the lot transfers, that could be, prepaid. This is an opportunity for somebody to capture $200,000 worth of value out of their existing property while continuing to maintain it in the open market when they sold the Covenant lot. So if that program, but I think that to your point, there's a lot of confusion, and the planning and permitting process is not an easy one on Nantucket. And I think if we can make an effort to streamline that process for people, there could be more participation. I think there's my estimates looking across the community, there are a large number of people that would love to capitalize on their equity, but don't necessarily want to leave the community or reduce their value or sell out of their home. And there could be an opportunity to create some relief to the 75 or 81 people that are on the list.
I would think if you held some kinds of workshops or something like that, sort of the way you all did in the churches before the run-up to town meeting, that kind of thing could really be helpful to people, because if I had that kind of land, I wouldn't know where to begin. And I think, would I know to go to the planning office and say, walk me through this? I don't know. It's like barriers to entry. It's a black box and very confusing, and a lot of people haven't previously had to go before the planning board, and they don't know what that's like. Or it's interesting because I'd say 3/4 of people coming before the planning board have legal counsel, and then the other quarter we always try to treat them extra nice and encourage them and thank them repeatedly and whatever, but it takes a fair amount of gumption and self-confidence to do that. So I think that if you really, it might be good to follow up with some people who have actually created them and get a read from them about why they ultimately were galvanized to move ahead. Most of them, it's a personal story. Some of them, you're right that they're older and looking for a way to get some equity, could be, depending on who it is. I think it would be the old line Nantucketers, because I think the proportion of loss of long-term housing here to investment by people who don't live here is really, as we all know, part of the real stressors on the market. But I think you'd really want to target closely, and I think tying in somehow with outreach through churches would really be pretty cool too.
I'd like to, go ahead, Brooke.
So I want to ask Anne, if you wouldn't mind speak.
That's what I wanted to do. I want to
Okay.
acknowledge, because Anne has made this marketing effort. She has been on the radio, has sent newsletters, talks about lot creation. You haven't necessarily had a funding mechanism to help people with it. You've talked about maybe some tax credits. Have you ever walked a person through the entire process? And what do you find are your stopping points or things, and whether, if we create a program, how could we best match your efforts or help your efforts along?
Hi, I'm Ann Crispa, Director of Housing Nantucket. There's a lot of questions in that. I wasn't really prepared to think about this and respond, but just listening to the discussion here, it made me think about our Worcester Polytech interns that spent the semester studying the Covenant program, and what the charge to them was to try to market the program and figure out profiles of different sellers, like Judith is talking about, and try to put them in boxes as far as, is it someone who's trying to fund a child's education when they go to college, or someone who's downsizing, and then interview the sellers afterwards to see what their process was like and how can we improve that. So we have all of that.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Okay. And transcripts from them. So the idea is so that we can when we have a different question, we can look at the transcripts and try to answer that question, not just questions that the students were charged. So to your question there, Brian, about what can you do to ease the process for people? I appreciate the fact that it is, I was going to say about 10,000, a lot of surveying costs, that sort of thing, to incentivize the sellers to go through the process. I think a lot of people just don't even know what the covenant program is, or there's a lot of misconceptions. I know what you were talking about there, the Tom Nevers incident. The neighbors didn't really realize that this isn't increasing zoning. It's a pre-existing secondary dwelling. There's no bonus here. So there's just a lot of misconceptions. I think it would help to do an outreach, and we are going to be doing our radio campaign again this summer, and then some targeted marketing as well. So I'll think some more about your other questions, or if you have any other questions, I can think more about that. But I hope that answered what you were trying to achieve.
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of, it's kind of the question I have in my mind, is like, is it an education effort that we might be able to assist with versus providing this, like, is the issue the financial incentive? Is the spending of the $10,000 the reason that more people aren't doing it or not? Or is it simply they're just not aware enough, or maybe we can be providing someone to be holding their hand through the process type of thing, or that aspect. So that's kind of the question I have. But I wanted to ask Laura, like, are you aware of other programs like we're kind of talking about here?
Yeah, back a while ago, some of you know I live in Barnstable, and I was very active in the community and in affordable housing. And we had a situation where we had a lot of, for lack of a better word, unpermitted apartments that the building commissioner said he was gonna, empty, and that would have been disastrous. So we put together a program an amnesty program to get them permitted, and they have to be affordable. There's a lot of different parts to it, but this kind of correlates that we didn't get, except for the ones that got caught, we weren't getting people to say, yeah, I want to create one, I want to create an apartment, even though we were hearing that there was a lot of interest in the community to do it. So we actually got a part-time person to walk people through the process. They had to go, go in front of the ZBA, which is daunting. Even if we set it up so there was just a hearing officer that didn't have to go before everybody, but it's still daunting. And they had to go through the building department and whatever else. So we set up, first we did it just with staff and education, and we started to roll, and then we decided to put cash into it by saying, we'll give you up to $20,000 to create a unit, or to bring your unit up to code, or whatever it was. And, we now have 200 of them on our SHI. So it was a combination of the two, but definitely the walking them through the process helped a lot, and then the cash just put us over the hump.
I would think if the number's 10,000 and we have a $100,000 revolving account on it because it's getting paid back, it's short money to create 10 a year. If it's 20,000 and we put $200,000 aside in a revolving account, knowing the money's not going away, it's just revolving. It's a cheap opportunity. My general impression is the process is daunting, and from my personal experience attending planning board or HDC or other meetings, and I consider myself well informed and able to sit in front of the room. It's not easy, and checking all the boxes. So I think that's something we really need to consider, and how we can staff this in a way to help the process.
that was both your comments were very helpful. I do think inevitably having to come up with 10,000 out of pocket to create something and then wait and wonder who's going to be there and all the rest of it. That's asking a lot for people, especially if they're helping their kids with school loans or if they've got elderly parents or maybe around here they may have equity lines, but not everybody would be in that position, especially if it's older people and they're moving to retirement status or have health care bills or, so I think it's probably both.
So in an effort to kind of make headway here and move this along, so for our next meeting, we need to kind of think about what the marketing plan is and how we could work with Housing Nantucket and their marketing efforts that are coming out in future months and describing it. Then staffing in helping the process, and whether that's a regular engineer, surveyor, or lawyer, or somebody that's out there
That's
building a
very
team
smart
around
that
it.
If you could put out an RFP for somebody who's the standing surveyor and the standing lawyer so that they develop expertise, it's enough of a volume that could be an incentive. They'd be able to help people because they've been through it enough themselves. They develop credibility with the boards they're having to approve it. It would save money if there's some kind of a bundling arrangement that they're going to be, not that people would have to use them, but that they're available to within our budget kind of structure. That makes a lot of sense.
And then if we come back to the next meeting with hopefully some sort of kind of application process, steps, and then general guidelines of repayment on the process. Like if it's selling to a family member, does that qualify or not qualify? I wouldn't see any reason it shouldn't, but that's something that should be noted. Or how long the loan is eligible before the property needs to sell or transfer.
It makes me think back to the very good film that Brooke and Tucker worked on, and wonder if like Nantucket TV or somebody might have an interest in developing something, because that probably makes it a lot easier if you're doing presentations to people to have 12 minutes of something that, for example, what you said about transcripts, and that have people that really they can relate to. So maybe somebody in the community they know even, or whatever, that really be helpful. And the people who've done it to testify that it wasn't impossible. I'm happy that I now have someone nearby that has this opportunity because of what I did or whatever. I think you could, I don't know what the cost of that ultimately would be, or if there's more grant funds or whatever, but if we are really going to do it right, it may be helpful to have a tool like that also in our bigger budget pot.
So,
Yes, Brooke.
to my mind, I think this also addresses the question that comes up, or the concern that comes up a lot, of families who own real estate here and are trying to let their kids settle here, and that this is a great opportunity to help people whose assets are invested in their land and they don't necessarily have cash in the bank, to take that step to create a covenant lot for their kids. And with the work Anne and her group has been doing on the family member exemption, I think it kind of all comes together in addressing this long-standing concern in the community of how are my kids ever going to be able to stay here. And I think this is an important piece of the housing puzzle that we could hopefully address.
And in over the course of the next month, do you have, if we were setting timeline goals, do you have time in the next month to kind of meet with some portion of this group to come back with a deliverable for our next meeting? So we're looking at kind of some action steps on where we would want to take this. Is that realistic? Okay, great.
I just want
Charlie,
to
guys.
echo what Judith was saying, just about thinking about using a visual of some sort, video. That was such a powerful video. But thinking about it from, the homeowner that's actually helping to create these lots. We don't regularly hear from those people. And so I think that could be really powerful when trying to get more people involved in the program. So
Great, so we need marketing, then team, and then a decision on what we want the funding cycle and recoupment to look like. Those are kind of to come back to. I'm getting quite a smile.
Well, I think, so I mean, certainly Ann and I and anyone who's interested in the board can get together to kind of like talk through a little bit more of the, you know, what is needed, what might work, might be realistic. We need to, there's quite a bit of investigation with regard to, as Judith pointed out, like, do we need to RFP out to be assembling the team
Right.
and that sort of thing. So I think it's realistic to think at the next meeting we can come with an outlined proposal of how it might work and so forth. We're probably not going to be in final form.
Oh, I wouldn't.
Yeah,
No, I wouldn't
yeah.
think so. Yeah. This for first step.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But I think one, like a fundamental component is, so, which came up earlier, like, is this money a grant of some sort, or is it repayable at a certain juncture? So does the board have a direction on that?
I think if you're saying revolving fund, there better be some repayment.
Yeah, okay,
I
and
think
Yeah.
that probably at the time the deal is transacted and finalized.
so when the lot is sold, the money is repaid.
Right.
So then secondarily, is there any interest component to that?
I think-
Not payable until the actual transaction?
My thinking would be if the lot transacted within a window of a couple of years, but then once if they didn't sell, then there would be an interest accrual. In other words, to incentivize people to actually sell the lot as opposed to just take advantage of the loan to create a lot and sit on it for years and years and years, so that the interest would begin accruing after 2 or 3 years.
that's a good point.
So
Good point.
would be the way I would go.
And I think that those are the details, to your point, you know, the next meeting's not going to be the program, right? So I think that these are, as the outline is created and we're looking for what are the obstacles in marketing, what are the obstacles in loan repayment, these are the details that is worth kind of pounding out at the next meeting with a document in front of us. Or, you know, prior to the meeting, what are all the questions that we want to answer together? Any?
Brian, do we want to ask if anyone wants to work with Tucker on this?
Yes, would anyone directly like to work with Tucker and Ann at the subcommittee on this?
Who would like to be involved? I mean, it could be just Ann and I, you know, putting together this initial cut, but anyone is welcome to be a part of that.
Well, I would also like to look to Laura's expertise in the program that they
Yeah.
used in creating the apartments, because I think that there's valuable mirroring that could happen there, in addition to the work that Ann's already created.
Well, I'll be happy to help.
Excellent,
Extra help.
excellent.
Great, thank you, Charity Grace.
Happy
Yes,
to
sir. Awesome.
Thanks.
And then with the follow-up to that, a continued conversation of down payment assistance, because realistically, we need to create the lots before we can help pay for them. So if we chunk this off in, you know, the tangible, you know, results.
The down payment part actually may be the easier one to have like a pretty solid draft to look at for the next meeting.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, because there will be houses turning over that aren't necessarily new lots.
True.
That
True.
people might need help with.
Okay, great. Any more continued conversation there? Do we want to cover anything more with Laura? Laura, did you have any more comments that you wanted to touch base on?
No, just if you have any other questions or anything else you were thinking of that, wasn't there another program that, Tucker?
Well, there are several programs, yeah, there were 4 or 5 programs that we had on that original list.
Right.
Rental assistance and others, but I think we are trying to take one, take some action, and then, yep.
Okay,
We're going to chunk off our goals a little smaller and then accomplish one at a time.
sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah, there, with everything else that comes at us. Budget review, this is kind of a carryover, but there's some sub-items to go over.
Yeah, so in the packet is an updated version of the budget tracking document that you all looked at a little bit at the last session. basically some of the categories of expenditures have been moved to track better with the potential funding buckets for those actions. No real numbers have been added or removed from what was viewed previously. But kind of in relation to the earlier discussion around SHI list management, I think it would be, well, two things. One, there's a new treasurer who will be starting at the town in the next week or so, and it's the intention to get together with that person once they have arrived and settled a little to go over basically the financial reporting that the trust gets, how Megan and I receive information from the finance department, doesn't necessarily track the way that I think this board wants to be able to keep track of the different buckets of funding that are available and so forth. So we're hoping, depending on, they're coming in at a very busy time of year for the finance department and so forth, so it's a little touch and go on what they may be able to accomplish before the June meeting. But in the next meeting or two, we're hoping to have actually a new, an updated format and a good working relationship on, how the information gets communicated to us. But related to how we are thinking about the budget dollars and, again, the SHI list conversation before, just to refer back to that document, at the bottom of the chart around the SHI unit count, we have noted, we haven't made any presumptions about what Housing Nantucket, what Habitat for Humanity, what the Housing Authority might be doing with regard to SHI unit creation. And so we're planning to invite for the next meeting, the June meeting, each of these organizations to come and present a little bit about what their plans are over this period, both for SHI unit and non-SHI unit creation, and what might be required from the trust and others in terms of land, financial assistance, other forms of support to achieve their goals. And I think that would be very useful to this board in thinking about all the things that you all are thinking about.
Right. Yeah, it'd be nice to have those discussions, to project out in years ahead how we're allocating funding and what opportunities we can offer those groups.
Exactly.
Great.
So the second item related to the budget item on the agenda was related to travel and conference reimbursement. And so I think at some point the board, probably wants to set up some sort of expense policy. I'm not going to do that today necessarily, but I know that there are different members of the committee that have incurred expense to attend an MHP training or another board-related conference and so forth. And so I just think it would be a good thing to authorize reimbursement for this past year for anyone who's on the committee for those travel and conference expenses. The year end for the town is June 30th, so it's kind of important to process these if you all are so inclined.
And I'd like to encourage the overall concept in the reimbursements, but in thinking about and setting a policy moving forward so that everyone has willingness and openness to attend off-island events, meetings, conferences, to know that there is a budget set aside to, as a volunteer group, know that all of our participation only makes us better and stronger and smarter. I don't know, you got to help me out, Tucker, on the process for looking at reimbursements if anybody has them for this year. Can you outline that for if anybody's looking?
Yeah, just if anyone who has reimbursements, if they can get copies of the receipts and just some sort of print out a flyer from the conference or print out from the internet of, what it was that they attended. If you can package those together and submit them to Megan, they can be forwarded on to the finance department for reimbursement and charged to the appropriate account under the trust.
Great.
I can, if anyone, just connect with me offline about it, because I can give you the form that we use as staff to get reimbursed, and we'd also need a W-9, of course.
And then being the only board that I sit on and not having a process or policy, does anybody have any thoughts that they'd like to share on kind of a moving forward process on this, or?
I would just offer having some idea about how many trips a year, how I can imagine there's going to be some turnover in this board. For example, if I'm probably not going to still be the rep from NPDC, but there's, I think, some funding because of being on the planning board that might be used. So it may be like if there's other funds, you use those first, not personal funds, but other mechanisms. I can imagine at some point you might have somebody who's, I think you do well to set either dollar
A max
approximation
dollar.
or number of events or something like that, just to have some rationing among the group, and because money isn't infinite. And it may be helpful too, I know you do this, Megan, but if there's like standing events from one year to the next. I know, Tucker, you said the APA's coming to Boston, is that?
That's 2 years from now, yes.
No,
Yeah.
but there's trainings that you've been giving us information about, but it may be good to like have a consolidated list of typical dates or types of events so that people could kind of divvy up who's going to which one to maximize the learning, or to be able to plan their own schedules if you're really trying to encourage people to do that.
I think one of the things, Megan, if we could work through kind of what are the baseline, in setting a budget annually, what are the baseline expenses that we're going to take, right? So it's $75 on the ferry, a car rental is $50 a day, there's a hotel room kind of limitation. If we look at those as a per individual annual, and then the fee to the event will give us a way to kind of backtrack into it. Is that something that you think you could work on for us?
Yeah, I mean, I can get you my past expenses for the next meeting if you want, for the training I did at MHP just recently.
Great. And that was a local event, there was no airfare included?
There was.
Oh, okay.
So it was a flight to Boston, a rental car for the first meeting, so it was 2 separate sessions, an all-day long session in Boston, rented a car, drove down to the Cape, went to another evening session on the Cape, because missed the last boat, had to stay the night. So the whole thing cost about $600 or $700.
Well, I think that's a
Yeah.
great baseline to look at what a 2-day event would look at in cost, and we can work backwards from there in an effort to encourage people to be going to more education opportunities. Okay.
And I think that there's, like Tucker and I are going to the Housing Institute in June, and, he'll, the best we can do to travel together, share a rental car, and, to minimize cost. I think you can't guarantee that all people are going to make the effort to minimize cost. So I think having some sort of controls or limits makes sense. And
Does the town require pre-authorization?
I think for like travel involving a flight, out of state, but not pre-authorization for a within-state
Okay,
conference.
just that's the kind of thing you'd want the policy to, just so everything's
Yeah.
lined up and people are aware of things.
It'd be great if for the next meeting, we could look at that kind of outline document, set a figure, have the policies consistent with the town, and then move that forward.
Just know if we're gonna be retroactively approving reimbursements though for this year,
You better hurry.
we will likely need that prior to
Right, exactly.
because it's the end of the fiscal
Right.
year, and we have to go by the select board, which is now on summer schedule every other week. So if anyone does intend on retroactively submitting. I don't know that from a reimbursement standpoint that'll happen if we wait till.
I do not have any, and you won't be hearing from me.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I know Brooke has attended some, and so I think I completely agree with having the set policy, which is what I was saying at the next meeting. Maybe we can be establishing limits, and no problem to have some examples of different attendance of different things and what the cost of doing that was. But I think order of magnitude wise, I'd be surprised if this board, the total of any reimbursement would, again, not knowing everything that everyone might have attended, if it exceeded $2,000, I'd be completely shocked. And I just think you should be authorizing that. And in general, I would just say, I mean, Andrew has been very supportive of attending these types of events, and I personally find are of tremendous value, and I really encourage the board to attend when they can.
I would agree. Great.
I have a couple of conferences that I went to that I piggybacked with family stuff, so I'd be more interested in reimbursement for the conference cost, not any housing or transportation or anything.
And I don't have any.
Talking about a few $100 maybe.
Great. Awesome.
So do we need to approve that officially?
Yeah, why don't you make a motion to approve?
Move to approve retroactively appropriate expenses and that and move prospectively to develop a policy that we'll need to consider more detail at the next meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Moving on to the next item. That completes the budget review. Tucker, there's nothing else to cover. Data platform update.
Just a 2-second update. Riemann, I met with Caroline Frey from the data platform, and we're delighted to learn that they set a target goal for the survey responses, and they had exceeded it by well over 50%. So they had a target of 400, and at the time we talked to her, which was about a week ago, they had 650 responses, and we're still actively marketing the survey. So the good news with that is that not only do we get the kind of data that they had anticipated at the 400 level, but it gives them a whole other level of measurement and detail. So we're going to get even more out of the survey than their stretch goal, which I think is great. And the only other thing that I can say is the contract with the town took a long time to execute. So our timeline got scrunched a little bit out. So we're looking at having a final report from them toward the end of the summer, probably maybe early September, which I think will dovetail really well with the work of our Neighborhood First work group and the other things that we're doing. So that's where we're headed.
So in a plug for more data, the survey is still live. Anybody that is in attendance, watching on television, or sitting on this board that hasn't taken the survey, I encourage you to take it. Share it through your social media challenges, and then have 5 conversations in the next 2 days with people and encourage them to take it. So the more data, the better. So if we can pass that along.
And one last thing, I think she said about a third of the people who responded 23% of the people who responded have also signed up to be on the ongoing panel. That's the people who have agreed to fill out future surveys, so that we now have a pipeline for qualitative data around the community, which is, that's the part of when we shared costs with Remain. That was the part of the cost that Remain picked up, was the development of this ongoing panel that we can tap into in the future for our future needs. So I think it's a really cool project that takes on a life of its own going forward for us. So
Great. Hearing no more conversation, moving on to item 11. I think this may be a carryover, but is there new information on fire station property update?
Well, there was a meeting that Ken and I think Brooke may have attended with Libby, and again, going back to the SHI list management chart, you can see the fire station property on there as potentially providing a period of safe harbor a few years out. So the punchline is the select board is interested in seeing this develop further. Libby is supportive of that, but I don't think there's a rush to, come up with the next thing yet. I think we want to be considering how it can fit into the extension of the safe harbor period.
Great.
And just one further comment, it really interrelates with administration's planning for municipal office use and other community uses. So it's sort of like in this part of a larger conversation. So it, again, something that needs a little more time, and we can use the time in terms of Shiloh's management.
Yeah, you'll recall in the first floor of the concept that the folks from Union Street put together, that could be, meeting space, retail space, town office space, and so forth. So as Brooke was saying, there's more input we want to gather in terms of how that whole facility may be developed. And again, the work that the data platform is doing, Judith brought up earlier, is very likely to be informing how we might want to be thinking about that facility or that property and its highest and best use.
And in the short term, the fire department is preparing to move eminently, and the property will be used by other town offices in the near term.
Yeah, the health department and the Concom will get relocated to the existing fire station building with a little bit of fit up.
Natural resources.
Natural resources.
Tell them to be careful. It's like the electric company. You never know.
Well, I think that was the select board's concern when they first heard the plan. But I think everyone's on the same page. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, but I just thought I'd point it out here relative to SHI. In the packet is the actual SHI list. Like, I don't know how often people look at it, but knowing that it's posted and so forth, but that is the official list from DHCD and shows as of February, 132 units officially on the list. They periodically update it. There isn't necessarily a specific point of each year, but that was that most recent update.
Great, thank you. Continuing on to item number 12, the CHIP application marketing.
Well, on June 6th, someone from this group will need to present on our former CHIP, what we got last year and how it's been spent. I did that last year. I'd rather not do it this year, but it's going to be at the hospital, not at the Athenaeum. So I'm not sure if anybody wants to step up. If not, I can do it, but.
I'm happy to help.
Okay.
If you want to help me
Yeah, I
write
can
it,
help
I'll
write
be
it.
the speaker.
That would be perfect.
Yep.
Thank you, Brooke.
Rena, thank you for standing up last year.
Yeah.
I know that those presentations aren't your favorite
Yeah.
place to be, but I do
Yeah.
appreciate the work that you put into them. And
And
so
then-
this will be the wrap-up conversation that'll happen, and then there's also the new application.
The new application, Brooke and I met with Caroline from Data Platform and also with Grant Sanders, who is building a new marketing business here. He's here permanently from Connecticut before he was going back and forth. And so we talked mainly about a website and an online dashboard, housing dashboard, that the Data Platform would like to create that would be updated on a regular basis and would provide us with statistics and information which would inform our decisions. But then on the other side, the public side, we were talking about, and this is part of marketing that we've been talking about through the strategic plan process, to have kind of, we talked about housing hub, kind of a one-stop shopping for information on programs, on regulations, on the SHI list, on how to qualify with links, and that
could be our next CHIP application if everybody agrees that that's something worth pursuing.
I think based on the work we put in on the strategic plan, that was a very, very critical area for us, and we've already touched base on our needs for marketing in general, today. I for one, appreciate the concept and encourage the idea.
Yeah.
So we've received some preliminary proposals from both the data platform and from Grant Sanders on the putting together of the data and the visualizations on the data platform side, and then the creation of the website and a communication strategy for the trust in general on everything we're doing. And that would be a more comprehensive marketing plan. So we've talked about this a little bit around, covenant lot creation, around other programs. We've gotten feedback that people aren't aware of the closing cost assistance program, that as part of our strategic plan, the idea that the community knows what we're doing, the programs we're creating, how they work, and have access to those resources through one website is sort of the idea in my imagination, that we are the hub and that we literally have a centralized website that links to all the housing resources in the entire community eventually. And I think we start with pieces of that and then expand it over time. But when we talk about like the communication, Grant had proposed things like podcasts and outreach through radio and videos as part of this community communications program. And so I think really what we would hope to get today is a vote from this body to move forward with a CHIP grant application, because again, our timeline is such that the deadline is before our next meeting, and that we could go together, get an application pulled together for this funding cycle.
So my question is that in the last application, we received how much funding, it was designated to what program, and we're giving that up to focus our energy on this.
Exactly. Last year, you all applied for closing cost assistance for the 150 level for $50,000 and received that. You also did apply for some funds to begin a down payment assistance program and did not receive funding for that last year.
So just to know, and we expended all of those funds, or how much of that 50,000 went to 150 percenters?
Again, this is something we're going to need to verify with the finance department, but I would estimate that more or less those funds have been expended, or there may be a very small amount left.
So just moving, looking forward, we won't have that bucket to be taking from on the 150 approvals.
Correct. And so the question, so I think different things that you have to balance are part of the CHIP program from the hospital is sort of new and sustainable. So you've come twice now for closing cost assistance, been granted twice. I think the hospital views that it's been a very successful program of yours. So there could be ongoing support if you were to come back under that. I can't say for certain. But on the other hand, something new that is helping with thoughtfully spending the large amounts of money that were appropriated by the voters, and educating and communications, could be something that's very appropriate.
Rima, looking to you, since you've made the applications in the past, and kind of, do you feel that we could make two and make the same one and then a new one as a one-time, or if we position them in the right way?
Yeah, I really need to look at how we used the funds last year and get that report to decide whether it's worth it to move forward, or if we are, maybe use another portion of our budget to put aside for that. I think right now, education and outreach is really important, and also this would allow us to have a more visible presence as the trust. We've kind of been operating, now we're on TV, but it gives us a more public face and lets people know that they can turn to us for help and information, whereas, our current website doesn't offer that much in those terms.
Okay.
I just think that that's the bang for the buck that we would be getting in. And I haven't seen the hospitals, any of the changes they've made, the new amendments to their goals and objectives, but yeah.
The goals and objectives for the housing sector are the same as last
Okay,
year.
all right, because they tended to
So,
add things.
so I'd look for, I think, 2 separate motions, one for each category, and then a determination by in putting in the application if it's determined that 1 versus 2. But at this point, as the whole body here, I think it's worth having 2 motions for each application.
So I would move that we authorize a subcommittee to prepare an application for a combined data and communications strategy in coordination with the data platform and SAND Communications to apply for a CHIP grant to fund that.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Passes unanimously.
And I'll just mention before your second vote is, I believe you all have a meeting on June 18th is your next regular meeting, and the applications are technically due June 19th. So you could get this additional information and make a final determination about the second application, but you would need to have it prepared.
Prepared,
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
And then a second motion? On the application for closing cost assistance program.
I actually don't think we should go back for further closing cost assistance, particularly if we're going to do a down payment program targeted to that group.
Okay.
So, but
Can
someone else as well.
you elaborate on your thought on that?
Well, my thinking is that a down payment assistance is a much more robust support of people in the covenant program than a closing cost assistance. So I'm not sure. It's almost like one could replace the other, because someone could come in for down payment assistance in lieu of closing cost. In other words, there's an amount of cash that a buyer has to come up with in the covenant program, a down payment and closing cost. So I'm not sure we would be supplying both to any particular applicant. So while we have an existing program, I don't know. That's just my gut.
I appreciate your thought process, and I could see the application not allowing for application to both opportunities, but I would hate to eliminate the opportunity to apply for it through the CHIP program in the absence of not having the other program created or developed or at a phase that the funds are prepared to be distributed. So my personal opinion is I would encourage the board to make the application at minimum this year, and then have, because the funding source, there's potential for the funding source, where in a future year, based on the number of applications that we see for down payment assistance versus closing cost, we could potentially eliminate or redirect the funding. I think your point about having the ability to apply to both is a conversation that we should carry over in the down payment assistance conversation at the next meeting or as that program is developed. But I would hate to give away the opportunity to apply for money if it's there.
Well, I don't know. We haven't really set a cost yet.
Not yet.
On
But I think
what
it's
we'd be
substantial.
applying for. Yes, it would be substantial.
Is substantial 50,000 or is substantial
More.
150,000?
I would say on the order of 100.
And that would be for the first motion that we talked about.
Right.
Okay.
Which I think would have been helpful. I mean, I'm concerned that if we ask for too much, we risk I just don't know.
On the flip side of that, if we don't ask, we don't know, is kind of my feeling. So the question is,
Well, I could tell which was the realtor, which was the social.
I don't know if it helps in your deliberations. Just a reminder that the process is such that grants are awarded in December, and there is no limit on the number of applications that any particular organization can make.
well, knowing that we have a meeting the day before the application is due, can I encourage a motion to prepare the application for continued conversation at the next meeting? Anybody want to make that motion?
Not really.
Traditionally, the chair doesn't make motions, but I'm going to make the motion that we prepare the application for the next meeting for the, to reinstitute the CHIP funding for the closing cost assistance program. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
No.
No.
Okay. Moving on. That's okay. Are there any board comments? Hearing none. Move on to item number 14, public comments. We are well attended today, so open the floor to the public. Anne, I see your hand up.
The drill.
Hello again. Just checking in on the easement for Monhanset. I saw it in the packet, but I didn't hear.
It's under other.
Okay. Next month.
No, next.
Next item.
Next time.
Okay.
Voted on it. So it came in after the fact to address it as a particular item, but it's been voted, so it. Thank you. Yeah.
Any more public comments? Yes, Bethany?
Interesting conversation about the closing cost assistance program. I just want to reiterate how helpful it's been for home buyers out here. It's a deal breaker for a lot of people. Even looking at the Habitat's closing coming up, we've got a Habitat attorney, we've got a buyer's attorney. These closing costs usually add up to $7,000 to $10,000. And they're critical. It's a deal breaker for a lot of people. We also don't know when these opportunities are going to come up. So I think just if there are funds out there available, putting in a pitch for getting, say, $100,000 at $10,000 per applicant is a nice pool of funds you could access for when the opportunity does arise for somebody 100% AMI and under to be able to come to you, because we don't really know when these opportunities will arise. They could arise at any time. It's not like we're just waiting for Richmond Great Point or Surfside, So I like the idea of if you have access to funds like the CHIP program, which is only a 5-year program, right, Tucker? We've only got, how many years left?
We're 3 years into a 5-year program.
Right, so, these funds don't come around every day. We've all been in affordable housing for a long time, and we know that we have had moments where none of this opportunity was available for funds. So if the opportunity is there, I encourage you all to go get those funds, set them aside, wait for the opportunity to arise, because nobody really knows when that might happen. We see buyers come in the office all the time that do fit the bill for 100% AMI and less, and would be very, very appreciative of those closing costs, funds.
So to clarify, the CHIP program is the 150s. We have funds available for the 100s.
We can use CPC and other funds
Yeah.
for the
That's true for
The-
the other guys.
for the other guys. This is just the unrestricted funds from CHIP
That's a good
for
point, yeah.
150.
Thank you. Again, I'm dealing with buyers right now for a covenant opportunity, and the closing costs are a deal breaker.
So is it appropriate for me to change my mind at this point? No, and the reason
I don't
had a
know,
thought.
honestly, I don't know the answer. I guess we
Okay.
can, I guess a new motion can be made and we can vote on a new motion.
Let me tell you my logic. I think my concern is that we should, about the prioritization of our applications, and that I would prioritize the communications piece over, if we were asked, we can only do, if we were asked in an interview, you've made 2 applications, which is more important to you? I think that what I would ask this group, and we will have time at the next meeting, to discuss and prioritize that, to answer that question in an interview with the program. If that were the case, I would be more comfortable preparing 2 applications for the next meeting, if we could have that discussion. So I guess that would address my concern.
Would you like to make a motion to have a discussion on?
So I will move that we also prepare an application for additional CHIP fund in the amount of $100,000 for the 150% area median income closing cost assistance program.
Second.
Okay, so that's open for discussion, or I can call for a vote. Does anybody have any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
So 4, 1 opposed. Did you get that? Okay. Thank you, Brooke. Okay, we are closed on public comments and we're open for other business. Megan, can I throw this to you to lead us through?
Yeah, I just have 2 quick things. Meeting location change for next month. The lifeguards will be in this room, so we will just be upstairs. We can still be recorded, we'll be at the same time, but June 18th, we will be upstairs instead of here. So I'll send you all a reminder as we get closer, but just wanted to announce that. Second thing is the deed finally came back, reviewed and approved from town council. She had a couple of minor edits to make. This was the one that was voted back in November to move forward with. It just, I don't know if it was a clerical error or what, dating years back. Then it never got recorded. So in any case, I have it here approved by town council. I'm gonna just pass it along for signatures as it was already approved at the prior meeting.
Are you a notary?
I am,
Yeah, she's
so
a notary.
I can notarize it and record it as well.
Great. I only have one other question for the next meeting. If you could provide or find for us an update on the fairgrounds covenant lot property and where that stands in the land court process.
Okay.
I'd just like to understand where that's at to be incorporated in the conversation if we're going to create covenant lots. What were the issues we may have had there? So the meeting is going to move to executive session. So we will clear all but staff. Megan, after the 10th time we do this, I'll have the process down, but can you help me through it again?
Yes, so I will need to, after we make this motion, just get in touch with Frank of NCTV to make sure the cameras are shut down, because
Okay.
are still rolling. But someone needs to make a motion to close open session, to enter executive session, not to re-enter open session, and it needs to be done by a roll call vote.
Great.
I move that we move into executive session, not to return to open session under Massachusetts Law 30A, Section 21A, for the following purpose. Purpose number 6, under the Open Meetings Law, to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property where an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body.
Thank you, Judith. So there's a second. All in, Rima.
Rima Sherry in favor?
Judith Wagner, yes.
Brian Sullivan, yes.
Brooke Moore, yes.
Charity Grace Mobson, yes.
Great. And to identify, we have 4 staff members that are joining us for this meeting.